Ladies and gentlemen, moment. There comes a moment, quiet, unannounced, when the world no longer feels like something you need to impress, not because you've stopped caring, but because you've started remembering who you are. You see, the madness outside was never your responsibility, but the peace inside, that was always yours to protect. As you grow older, something peculiar happens. You no longer chase every invitation to argue. You no longer attend every emotional storm you're summoned to. You become deliberate, quiet, observant, not because you're weak, but because you've learned that not every battle is worth your breath. There was a time when you were addicted to approval, saying yes to everyone but yourself. But now you pause. You evaluate. You choose you. And this is not arrogance, it's maturity. You realize that your energy is your currency. Every interaction either costs, and when you finally understand this, you stop making everyone rich while bankrupting your soul. You start protecting your mornings from chaos, your evenings from draining conversations, and your heart from unnecessary explanation. You learn that walking away isn't losing, it's returning. Returning to your own center, your own rhythm, your own truth. You understand that healing doesn't happen in noise. It happens in silence, in solitude, in sacred space. So you begin retreating not to hide but to rebuild. And in that retreat, you meet the most important person you'll ever know, yourself. You confront your shadows without shame. You nurse your wounds without announcing them. You begin to glow not for attention, but from alignment. The older you get, the more you let go. Let go of proving. Let go of pleasing. Let go of people who only love you when it's convenient. You stop explaining your worth. You stop shrinking to fit into shallow rooms. You stop being a guest in your own life. You walk alone if you must, not because you're unloved, but because you love yourself enough not to be mistreated. And somewhere along the way you realize peace is not a place. It's a decision, a boundary, a vow. Protect it like treasure, because in the end, it's not who claps for you that matters. It's whether your soul claps for itself when all the noise fades and all that's left is you. As time unfolds and life begins to show you the true weight of existence, you come to realize something profound. Peace isn't handed to you. It isn't a gift that people offer out of kindness, nor is it a condition the world sets up for your comfort. Peace is a personal responsibility, a sacred duty. The more you grow, the more you understand that protecting your peace is not an act of rebellion. It is an act of survival. When you were younger, you may have tolerated noise, emotional noise, social noise, the noise of other people's expectations crashing against your own unformed identity. You may have confused chaos with connection, thinking that being available to everyone made you valuable. But now, as the years add depth to your soul, you start to see clearly. You realize that the real weight of life isn't in how much you do or how many people you're there for. It's in how well you protect your inner stillness. You begin to see that peace doesn't mean an absence of problems. It means not allowing problems to consume your mind. It means letting go of the need to control everything. Because peace lives in surrender, not in struggle. You learn that people will try to hand you their burdens like passing hot coals, hoping you'll carry their chaos for them. And for a long time you might have done just that, burning your hands, your heart, your time, just to keep others comfortable. But now you're awake. You're no longer so quick to catch what was never yours to hold. You start asking, does this belong to me? And if the answer is no, you set it down quietly, without guilt. Because protecting your peace isn't about becoming cold, it's about becoming clear. You no longer sacrifice your emotional health to maintain shallow relationships or fulfill outdated obligations. You recognize that true peace begins with permission. The permission you give yourself to say no. You learn to say no without explanation. No to draining conversations. No to meaningless gossip. No to those who use your presence but never respect your essence. You stop over-explaining your boundaries because peace doesn't argue, it simply exists. It's not loud or dramatic, it's quiet confidence. It's knowing that your well-being matters more than being liked, more than being accepted, more than being understood. And in this space of self-respect, you begin to breathe again. Not the shallow breath of a people-pleaser, but the deep inhale of someone finally living for themselves. You rediscover your rhythm. Your mornings become sacred. Your thoughts become your own. You stop rushing, you stop reacting. You stop existing for validation. Because peace doesn't seek applause, it just is. As you grow older, you realize that you don't need to explain your healing. You don't need to justify your boundaries. You don't need to attend every argument you're invited to. You begin to understand that protecting your peace might disappoint some people, but it will save you. It will protect your mental clarity. It will preserve your emotional energy. It will create space for the things that truly matter. And once you taste this kind of peace, this grounded, centered, untouchable calm, you never go back. You stop chasing chaos disguised as passion. You stop confusing intensity for love. You stop giving unlimited access to people who haven't earned it. Because you now understand your peace is not for sale. This isn't selfish. This is sacred. And anyone who tries to convince you otherwise has likely benefited from your lack of boundaries. Let them go. Let them misunderstand you. Let them talk. You don't owe them your peace to make them feel comfortable in their dysfunction. You owe yourself something far greater. You owe yourself mornings without anxiety, nights without overthinking, days without guilt, a life where you are at the center, not in a narcissistic way, but in a self-honoring way. Peace is not just about quiet places or meditative music. It's about making hard decisions that protect your energy. It's about choosing solitude over senseless drama. It's about stepping back from roles you were never meant to play and finally becoming the director of your own story. As you grow older, remember this: the world will never stop making noise. But peace isn't found in silencing the world. It's found in not letting the world silence you. And that begins with a simple, powerful choice to protect your peace as if your life depends on it. Because, in truth, it does. The older you get, the more you begin to realize something no one tells you when you're young. You don't owe anyone your time, your energy, or your peace. There's a quiet freedom that comes with age. Not because you suddenly stop caring, but because you start caring differently. You start caring about yourself, about your mental health, about your boundaries, about peace. In your younger years, you may have been conditioned to believe that self-worth comes from sacrifice, that being endlessly available made you kind, that overextending yourself was a sign of love, that saying yes to others, even when it meant saying no to yourself, was a virtue. You became fluent in the language of guilt, mistaking obligation for loyalty. But as time passes and your perspective matures, you begin to understand how much you've given away trying to meet the endless demands of others. You start to see that not everyone who had access to you deserved it, that not every friend was really a friend, that not every family member had your best interest at heart. And in that clarity you come to a powerful realization. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. The older you get, the more intentional you become with who you give your energy to. You recognize that not all relationships are equal. Some are built on convenience, some on dependency, some on manipulation, and some, rare and precious, on mutual respect and growth. It becomes your responsibility to differentiate, to choose wisely, and to stop pouring yourself into cups that only leak. You understand that you're allowed to outgrow people. You're allowed to walk away from conversations that leave you drained. You're allowed to disconnect from those who only show up when they need something. And most importantly, you're allowed to do it without guilt. You begin to embrace the idea that your life is not a public park, it's a private sanctuary. Entry is by invitation only. You no longer feel the need to be everywhere, to explain everything, to be liked by everyone. You realize that the more you try to be everything to everyone, the more you become nothing to yourself. You start to pull back, not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom. You begin to say no, not to be defiant, but to protect your time. You stop picking up calls that drain you. You stop attending events that feel like obligations. You stop saying, "I'm fine," when you're not. Because now you understand, honesty with yourself is more important than acceptance from others. But the freedom that comes with this kind of clarity is subtle but powerful. You no longer seek validation from outside sources. You no longer chase applause. You no longer base your worth on how much you do for others. Instead, you look inward. You ask yourself, what do I need? What feels right for me? And then you honor that answer. You also begin to realize that life is short and energy is finite. You no longer spend it trying to fix people who don't want to be fixed. You no longer try to prove your value to those who are committed to misunderstanding you. You stop running in circles for people who wouldn't take a step for you. Because time has taught you that your piece is not worth the performance. This shift doesn't happen all at once. It begins with little things. A decision to leave a toxic group chat. A choice to rest instead of explaining. A refusal to engage in an argument that only leads to frustration. And with each boundary you set, something remarkable happens. You begin to return to yourself. And when you do, you find strength, clarity, freedom. You realize you've spent too many years trying to be who the world told you to be, and now you're finally becoming who you were always meant to be. Someone who protects their peace without apology. Someone who chooses solitude over noise. Someone who lives deliberately and loves deeply, but only when it's real. As you grow older, embrace this truth. You owe no one the version of you that sacrifices your sanity for their comfort. You owe yourself a life that feels good on the inside, even if it looks quiet on the outside. You owe yourself the space to grow, the grace to rest, and the courage to choose yourself every single time. Because in the end, what you owe others will change. But what you owe yourself should never be forgotten. There's a point in life where silence no longer feels empty, it feels powerful. As you grow older, you begin to realize that you don't need to respond to everything. You don't need to react, defend, explain, or prove yourself. Silence becomes your shield, your strength, and your sanctuary. In a world addicted to noise, your silence becomes a language only the wise understand. When you were younger, silence often felt like weakness. You thought speaking up, arguing back, and having the last word was the way to stay strong. You were taught that silence meant surrender, that not responding meant losing. And so you tried to fill every space with words, defending your character, explaining your intentions, justifying your boundaries. But as life matured you, as you experienced the weight of meaningless arguments and energy-draining battles, you began to see things differently. You learned that not every situation deserves your energy. Not every insult needs a reply. Not every misunderstanding is worth clarifying. You started to feel the cost of your own reactions, the toll it took on your peace, your mental clarity, your emotional balance. And slowly your silence evolved from hesitation into intention. You began to pause not because you were unsure, but because you were grounded. You began to withhold not out of fear, but out of wisdom. Because silence, when used with purpose, becomes a statement far louder than any response. Silence speaks volumes. It says, I'm not interested in chaos. It says, you can't control me with drama. It says, my peace matters more than your approval. And the more you embody that, the more powerful you become, not in a dominating way, but in a centered one. You no longer walk into every argument you're invited to. You don't chase closure from people who aren't capable of giving it. You don't beg to be understood by minds too clouded to comprehend your silence. Because now you know your silence is not an absence, it's a presence so strong, so unwavering, it makes the noise around you nervous. The older you get, the more you see how much of life is distraction. People poking at your triggers, situations designed to pull you out of character, noise demanding your attention and energy. But your silence becomes your filter. It separates what matters from what doesn't. It allows you to observe without absorbing, to witness without engaging, to be aware without being involved. And in this stillness, you begin to hear your own voice more clearly. The voice beneath the overthinking, beneath the worry, beneath the noise. The voice that says, you don't have to fight every time. You don't have to prove who you are. You don't have to explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You learn that silence is not just the absence of speech. It's the presence of control. It is restraint. It is poise. It is the inner knowing that your value isn't measured by how loudly you can argue, but by how peacefully you can walk away. And this silence, it's not cold. It's not passive-aggressive. It's not manipulative. It's sacred. It's the silence of someone who knows their worth, who has nothing to prove, who no longer seeks validation from voices outside themselves. You begin to walk differently, speak differently. Even your presence changes. People sense it. They sense the calm, the boundaries, the power. Some will respect it. Others will be uncomfortable with it. Because when you're no longer reactive, you can't be controlled. And for those who once thrived on your reactions, your silence is deafening. You stop participating in conversations just to keep the peace. And instead, you start protecting the peace by not participating. You stop giving energy to what you've outgrown. You let the storms rage without stepping into them. Because now, silence is not just a tool. It's a way of life. You choose silence, not because you have nothing to say, but because you know that some things aren't worth saying. You protect your mind from unnecessary battles. You protect your heart from senseless explanations. You protect your soul from the noise of the world, and in that silence you find peace. In that silence you find strength. In that silence you find yourself. As you grow older, you start to understand something that once felt unclear. You are not meant to be accessible to everyone. Not every hand that reaches for you deserves to be held. Not every voice that calls your name deserves an answer. And not every person who enters your life is meant to stay. The older you get, the more sacred your energy becomes. You begin to see your presence as a gift, not a given. When you're young, you often stretch yourself thin, trying to be everything for everyone. You make yourself available to people who only show up when it's convenient for them. You give time, attention, love, and support, hoping it will be reciprocated, often to find that it isn't. You believe that by showing up fully for others, they will see your value and treat you accordingly. But life teaches you, sometimes painfully, that not everyone values what they receive, and some only come close when they need to take. Now you might think that things are complicated for me to say, because you begin to see that access to you is something to be earned, not assumed. Just because someone knows your name doesn't mean they know your heart. Just because someone was there during a chapter doesn't mean they belong in the rest of your story. You begin to filter your circle, not out of pride, but out of wisdom, not because you've learned to prioritize your well-being. You recognize the emotional toll of constantly giving to people who don't give back. You start to observe the patterns, the ones who only reach out when they need something, the ones who drain you with complaints but vanish when you're in need, the ones who demand support but disappear in silence. And you start stepping back, not as an act of punishment, but as an act of preservation. You learn that love without boundaries is self-destruction, that loyalty without discernment is exploitation, and that empathy without protection leads to burnout. So you begin to close the gates. Not all the way, but carefully. You stop sharing your dreams with those who belittle them. You stop seeking comfort from those who never showed you warmth. You stop explaining your worth to those who are blind to it. And something powerful happens. You reclaim yourself. You no longer give pieces of yourself to people who've done nothing to earn your trust. You no longer tolerate disrespect masked as closeness. You begin to realize that protecting your space is not isolation, it's elevation. It's choosing to surround yourself with those who see you, value you, and nourish your growth. You stop being addicted to potential. You no longer stay in spaces where you are only tolerated. You no longer feel obligated to maintain connections that feel heavy, one-sided, or manipulative. You learn to walk away, not with bitterness, but with grace. You begin to understand that distancing yourself is not always a sign of anger, it's often a sign of clarity. The more you value your own energy, the more intentional you become with where you spend it. You begin to choose your peace over people's opinions, your time over forced conversations, your joy over draining obligations. You no longer entertain drama for the sake of keeping someone around. You no longer pretend to be fine just to maintain a connection. Because now, your standard is not convenience. It's mutual respect and emotional safety. And this shift doesn't make you cold. It makes you conscious. You become mindful of who gets your emotional bandwidth. You start to protect your inner world as fiercely as you once tried to protect relationships that didn't deserve your protection. You stop explaining your absence. You stop overextending out of guilt. You start to trust your instincts when they tell you this connection is costing too much. You understand that the right people will never need to be chased. They will show up, stay consistent, and honor your presence. They won't drain you, they'll pour into you. They won't confuse you, they'll bring clarity. And when you meet these people, you will wonder why you ever accepted less. As you grow, keep this truth close. Not everyone deserves access to you. Your energy is rare. Your heart is sacred. Your time is priceless. Protect it all, not out of fear, but out of deep self-respect. You are allowed to be selective with your peace. You are allowed to choose who enters your life. You are allowed to put yourself first without explanation. And in doing so, you don't lose people, you find yourself. There is a quiet shift that happens within you as you mature, not all at once, but slowly, like dawn breaking through the night. You begin to realize that the world isn't going to pause for you. People aren't going to always care how you feel, and life won't stop being messy, chaotic, or demanding. But through it all, you discover a profound truth. You are responsible for your own healing. You are responsible for your own growth. You are responsible for creating the peace you crave. In your earlier years, it's easy to believe that someone will come along and save you. That someday someone will understand the depth of your pain, lift the burden, and fix what's broken inside you. Maybe you waited for an apology that never came. Maybe you thought a better job, a perfect partner, or a new beginning would finally make you whole. But over time, life reveals the deeper truth. Your healing was never about them. It was always about you. Healing doesn't come from outside. It's not something you find in another person or in some distant future where everything finally goes right. Healing begins the moment you decide to stop abandoning yourself. The moment you stop suppressing what hurts. The moment you stop outsourcing your emotional stability to people who have no idea how to hold space for you. It starts when you sit with yourself not to criticize, but to understand. When you finally listen to the parts of you you've ignored for so long. The tired part, the insecure part, the disappointed part. And you hold it all without judgment. You let yourself grieve what you never got. You let yourself release what you thought you had to hold on to. You let yourself feel everything fully until it loosens its grip on your spirit. And from that space, something beautiful begins to grow. Not overnight. Not with fireworks. But quietly, patiently, you begin to trust yourself again. You begin to speak kindly to yourself. You stop gaslighting your own emotions and start validating your own experience. You begin to see that growth doesn't come from perfection, it comes from presence. From showing up for yourself every single day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard, you start to take responsibility not in a way that blames you for your pain, but in a way that empowers you to move forward. You stop waiting for closure from others and begin to give it to yourself. You forgive not to excuse, but to release. You let go not to forget, but to make room. And you grow not to impress, but to become. This process of self-healing and self-prioritization is not linear. Some days you'll feel strong and grounded. Other days old wounds will resurface and try to drag you back. But the difference is, you no longer abandon yourself in those moments. You stay. You hold yourself with grace. You remind yourself that healing isn't a destination, it's a commitment. You become more intentional about your life. You guard your time. You choose what you consume, who you listen to, and where you give your energy. You realize that not everything deserves a reaction, that not every emotion requires a response, that peace sometimes looks like doing nothing and letting it be. You begin to design a life that honors your healing. You create rituals that nourish your soul. You seek solitude not to escape, but to reconnect. You stop performing for acceptance and start living in alignment. You no longer chase love, you become love. You no longer prove your worth, you embody it. And you no longer fear being alone, because you've learned to enjoy your own company. The most powerful moment in your healing journey is when you stop asking who will take care of me and start declaring I will take care of me. That is when your power returns. That is when the cycle breaks. That is when you reclaim your life. As you grow older, remember this. Healing is not about waiting for things to get better. It's about deciding you deserve better and acting accordingly. It's about becoming the person you needed when you were hurting. It's about building a home within yourself so solid, so loving, that nothing outside of you can shake it. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be present. You don't need to have it all figured out. You just need to stop betraying yourself. Healing is messy. Growth is uncomfortable. But peace, real peace, is born in the middle of that sacred chaos, when you choose yourself again and again. There comes a moment in your life when you stop seeking approval and start seeking alignment, when you realize that peace is not found in pleasing others but in honoring yourself. You begin to understand that saying no is not rejection, it's protection. And choosing yourself is not selfish, it's survival. As you grow older, this understanding deepens. You no longer apologize for doing what's best for you. In your earlier years, you likely bent yourself to fit into places where you didn't belong. You said yes when you wanted to say no. You agreed to things that left your soul uneasy. You stayed silent to keep the peace, even when it meant disturbing your own. You molded your identity to avoid disappointing others, thinking that if you just gave a little more, cared a little harder, or worked a little longer, you would finally be seen, appreciated, and loved. But over time, you discover a painful truth. People-pleasing doesn't lead to peace. It leads to self-abandonment. You begin to feel a quiet resentment building inside you. A fatigue that has nothing to do with your body and everything to do with carrying the weight of everyone else's expectations. And then, one day, you realize you're tired, not just tired of others, but tired of betraying yourself. You begin to unlearn. You start by asking yourself one powerful question. What do I truly want? Not what others want from you, not what they expect, but what you want. And for many, that's a terrifying question, because it demands honesty. It demands courage. It demands a shedding of roles you've worn for years. But in that honesty, in that return to self, you find something sacred, clarity. And with clarity comes boundaries. You begin to say no without guilt. You decline invitations that feel forced. You walk away from conversations that leave you feeling small. You no longer engage in relationships that operate on obligation instead of reciprocity. You stop explaining yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you. And most of all, you stop proving your worth. This isn't about arrogance, it's about integrity. It's about living a life that aligns with your truth instead of one that pleases the world. You start choosing your peace over performance, your rest over relentless hustle, your intuition over outside opinion. And with each decision that honors you, a part of your old self, the one that tolerated too much, begins to fade. And in that space, you meet a new version of you, one that doesn't flinch when someone is disappointed, one that can hold silence in the face of judgment, one that can stand firm even when others walk away. Because now your validation doesn't come from applause, it comes from alignment, from knowing that your choices reflect your values, that your life feels good, not just looks good. You begin to understand that peace isn't passive, it's earned. It's created by 1,000 small choices that honor your energy. It's built in the moments you say, "This doesn't feel right," and walk away anyway. In the moments you trust your gut, even when others call you difficult. In the moments you protect your time like a treasure, because you finally understand its value. This self-respect becomes your foundation. And with it, you attract differently. You no longer resonate with chaos. You're no longer drawn to people who only love you when you're easy. You no longer seek connection in spaces that require you to shrink. Instead, you find comfort in solitude, in stillness, in the freedom of not needing to explain who you are. Because the truth is, peace is not found in being everything for everyone. It's found in being wholly yourself and allowing that to be enough. It's found in knowing that you are not for everyone. And that's not only okay, it's beautiful. As you grow older, let this be your quiet revolution. To stop betraying yourself for the comfort of others. To stop diluting your truth for the sake of acceptance. To stop exhausting yourself trying to be understood. And instead, to live as you are, fully, freely, and without apology. Because nothing is more powerful than a person who knows who they are, honors what they need, and no longer feels the need to explain it to anyone. That is peace. That is power. That is you. There is a sacred stillness that comes with aging, a deep, unshakable knowing that what you water will grow. And as you mature, you begin to understand this truth more intimately. Not everything in your life deserves your attention. Not every battle is yours to fight. Not every voice deserves to be heard inside your mind. There is a cost to constantly being available, constantly reacting, constantly chasing, and that cost is your peace. You start to notice how much of your energy you've given away to things that didn't matter in the long run. Arguments that led nowhere. People who were never going to change. Stress over things you couldn't control. The endless need to explain, justify, or win approval. And in that noticing, you begin to reclaim your power. You realize that peace isn't something the world gives you, it's something you protect with discipline. It's something you maintain with fierce commitment. You begin to treat your energy like currency. And you don't just spend it freely anymore. You become selective, intentional, aware. You start asking yourself, is this worth my inner calm? And if the answer is no, you learn to let it go. Not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. No longer run toward every fire trying to put it out. You don't get dragged into conversations that drain your soul. You stop responding to every slight, every opinion, every invitation to chaos. Because now you understand your peace is your responsibility. No one else is going to guard it for you. No one else is going to draw the line. It's up to you to decide what enters your mind, what touches your heart, and what shapes your day. You begin to value emotional boundaries as much as physical ones. You stop entertaining guilt disguised as love. You stop tolerating people who disrupt your spirit and then expect you to call it connection. You see that some relationships require too much explaining, too much defending, too much recovery. And slowly you step away, not to punish, but to protect. This is not about becoming closed off. It's about becoming clear. You still have love to give, compassion to share, presence to offer, but you no longer give it where it is mishandled. You begin to invest more in your internal world than the external noise. You prioritize clarity over chaos, depth over drama, peace over being right. And what happens next is powerful. Your life begins to simplify, not because it becomes easier, but because your choices become cleaner. You no longer live in reaction, you live in intention. You wake up and choose how to feel. You choose where your focus goes. You begin to notice the joy in small things, a quiet morning, a peaceful evening, a moment of real laughter. You're no longer waiting for the big win to feel good. You're creating peace in the everyday. You develop rituals that support your mind and body. You make space for silence, not to escape the world, but to return to yourself. You learn that protecting your peace often means saying no without apology, stepping back without guilt, and walking away without anger, because you no longer need the world to understand your boundaries. They exist for your protection, not their approval. And yes, you may lose people when you start choosing your peace. You may be called distant, cold, or difficult, but let them misunderstand. Because the peace you protect will bring you closer to yourself than any external validation ever could. And the people who truly belong in your life will respect your calm, not resent it. You begin to realize that your peace is the foundation of everything. Your health, your clarity, your creativity, your joy. When you are at peace, you think more clearly. You love more freely. You live more fully. It's not a luxury, it's essential. So as you grow older, let this become your quiet vow. To protect your peace at all costs. To let go of what doesn't serve you. To create space between stimulus and response. To honor the stillness within you. And to remind yourself over and over that a peaceful life is not the result of what happens around you, but of what you allow to happen within you. In this stillness, you don't lose power, you find it. In this restraint, you don't become passive, you become free. Because a calm mind and a quiet heart are no longer signs of withdrawal, but signs of mastery. And in mastering yourself, you become unstoppable, not through force, but through presence, through peace, through the unwavering decision to honor yourself no matter what. There's a moment quiet, almost unnoticed, when you begin to realize that the world doesn't slow down for anyone. Life keeps moving, people keep changing, and time keeps slipping through your fingers, and in that moment something within you softens and hardens at the same time. You realize that you can't keep living your life waiting for others to show up for you in the way you hope. You realize that no one is coming to rescue you from your disappointment, from your exhaustion, from your unmet needs. And so you rise, not out of bitterness, but out of a deep, soul-rooted necessity. This is where true self-prioritization begins. As you grow older, you learn that no one is obligated to understand the battles you've fought. No one is required to carry the weight of your dreams. And no one, no matter how much they love you, will ever fully know what it feels like to be you. That realization could feel isolating, but if you let it, it can also be liberating. Because in that space, you discover your power. You discover that the one person who will never abandon you if you choose not to abandon yourself is you. And so you begin to show up differently. You stop waiting to be chosen and start choosing yourself. You stop needing external validation and begin cultivating internal truth. You stop apologizing for wanting rest, for needing space, for saying no, for being unavailable, for putting yourself first, not because you think you're more important than others, but because you've finally understood that if you don't take care of yourself, no one else will. This is not the version of you that bends over backwards to keep the peace. This is not the version of you that tolerates disrespect in the name of loyalty. This is the version that rises with clarity. The version that says, I matter too, and actually means it. You begin to choose differently, not just in the big moments, but in the small, consistent choices that build a life. You start sleeping when you're tired instead of proving how much you can endure. You stop over-explaining your decisions to people who don't truly care. You begin eating foods that fuel you, moving in ways that energize you, spending time with those who uplift you. You clean out your space, your schedule, your soul, not because it looks good on the outside, but because it feels good on the inside. You start to recognize the patterns that kept you stuck, the self-sacrificing habits dressed up as kindness, the people-pleasing cycles that drained your life force. You begin to detach from the roles you've played for too long, the caretaker, the fixer, the one who always shows up even when no one else does. You begin to understand that strength isn't just about enduring. It's about discerning. It's about knowing when to hold on and when to walk away. And when you begin to walk away from obligations that break your spirit, from relationships that no longer align, from environments that stunt your growth, you don't feel guilty anymore. You feel clear, you feel powerful, you feel free. Because now you see that your peace is not a reward, it's not something others give you when you've earned it, it's your responsibility, it's your right, and it's yours to protect. You no longer offer it to chaos in the name of compassion. You no longer hand it over just to keep a false sense of harmony. You understand that prioritizing yourself isn't about selfishness, it's about sustainability. You cannot pour from an empty cup. You cannot build a meaningful life while constantly draining yourself for everyone else. You start asking different questions. Not, will they like me, but do I like this version of myself when I'm with them? Not, am I doing enough, but am I doing what actually matters? Not, how can I fix this, but is this even mine to fix? And those questions lead you to peace, not the kind found in a silent room, but the kind found in a steady heart. A heart that is no longer waiting, chasing, or explaining. A heart that is full because you chose to fill it yourself. You begin to stand taller, not because life got easier, but because you got stronger. You learn to say, this is where I end and the world begins. You learn to honor your own needs without apology. You learn to carry your own life. And in doing so, you become someone who doesn't just survive, you become someone who leads their own life, quietly, steadily, powerfully. You stop trying to control what others do and start focusing on what you can do. Protect your peace, trust your intuition, and live as if your well-being matters, because it does. That's what happens when you choose yourself. Not once, but every day, again and again, until the noise fades, the path clears, and you finally hear your own voice and follow it home. As you continue to grow older, there's a profound clarity that begins to settle deep within your being. You stop chasing everything that once felt urgent, and instead you start paying attention to the quality of your inner world. You begin to measure success not by how much you have, but by how little disturbs your peace. And in this transition, one truth rises above all. Not everyone will understand your growth, and they're not supposed to. There will be people who remember you only as who you used to be, who will try to drag you back into roles you've outgrown. They'll notice the distance you created, the silence you've embraced, the boundaries you've drawn, and they'll feel threatened, confused, even offended. But you learn not to take it personally. You realize that your healing makes some people uncomfortable because it disrupts the dynamics they benefited from. You start noticing how the more you prioritize your well-being, the more pushback you receive from those who were never truly aligned with your peace. when you were always available, always saying yes, always sacrificing your needs, they called you kind, loyal, selfless. But the moment you say no, the moment you need space, the moment you stop explaining yourself, you become distant, cold, changed. And maybe you have changed. Maybe you finally decided to honor the quiet truth inside you. Because what they don't see is the weight you carried in silence, the nights you couldn't sleep, the tears you never let fall in front of them, the way your nervous system was constantly in survival mode, trying to hold everyone together while falling apart inside. They saw the smile, not the ache behind it. They saw your presence, not the price you paid to maintain it. So now you protect yourself differently. You no longer rush to clarify when someone misunderstands your peace. You don't argue with people committed to seeing you through the lens of who you used to be. You've learned that explanation isn't always owed, and understanding isn't always possible. And that's okay. Because this part of your journey isn't about them, it's about you. You begin to value your energy with fierce tenderness. You learn to walk away from conversations that drain you, to release guilt that was never yours to carry, and to say no without dressing it up in excuses. You learn to be unapologetically yourself, not in a loud or aggressive way, but in a deeply grounded way. You no longer seek approval because you've learned that not being liked is a small price to pay for being free. In this stage of life, silence becomes one of your greatest teachers. You begin to see how peace doesn't always look like happiness. It often looks like solitude, simplicity, and space. You find strength in detachment, not from love, but from dysfunction. You stop begging people to see your worth, and instead live in a way that makes your value undeniable to yourself. And when the world tries to provoke a reaction through gossip, rejection, misunderstanding, you respond not with rage, but with stillness. Because not every insult deserves an answer. Not every invitation to chaos needs your attendance. You begin to see the power of not reacting, the freedom in not defending, the clarity in choosing your battles with care. This doesn't mean you don't feel deeply. It means you've learned how to channel that depth into something nourishing rather than self-destructive. You give yourself permission to grow beyond the limitations others place on you, to redefine yourself again and again without needing consensus, to grieve who you were without shame, and to love who you are becoming without apology. You become fiercely loyal to your own peace, not in a defensive way, but in a sacred way. You understand that life is too short to spend in environments that exhaust you, too precious to waste on relationships that drain you, too beautiful to allow bitterness to take root. When someone says, "You've changed," you smile and say, "Yes, I've learned to stop betraying myself." And that's all the explanation you'll ever need. You're not here to convince anyone of your worth. You're not here to be everything to everyone. You're here to live authentically, to walk your path with courage, to protect your peace as if it's the very foundation of your future, because it is. And once you make peace your priority, the rest of life begins to align in ways you never imagined, quietly, powerfully, unapologetically,